Hey there, I'm Alex. Today I want to talk to you about LivePortrait. I think it's been around for a few weeks now, and you've probably seen all the memes, all the videos, all the stuff going around. But of course, what I'm interested in is it worth our time? Is it something we can use in visual effects? Does it hold up? Is it even worth us looking into it? So I spent a few weeks looking at the stuff, and I even posted on my YouTube channel a sneak peek of what I was looking into when the video to video hadn't been fully released yet. So I posted my results, but of course I didn't want to fully cover it because the tool was still evolving, it was still being worked on. But now that it's fully released and fully out there, and it's actually just been updated a week ago with some new features, I figured now was a good time to cover it. So um, in case you don't know, LivePortrait is this technology that you give it a source image or a source video, and then you can just give it a driving video, and then it'll just generate that animation for you. And it does a really good job, especially with stills. It seems to be a bit more forgiving. What's interesting and really exciting about this is how quick it is to run, which I'll show you when we jump over into ComfyUI. And you can, of course, run it outside of ComfyUI, but because I like having the full control, ComfyUI seemed like the perfect fit for me. But I'll be posting this website for you guys to check out, and then the original GitHub where it all got started and first published, and then the port to ComfyUI, which is by Kijai, which is this one right here. And this is the one that I'm using. These are the nodes that I'll be using in ComfyUI. So when you get this installed, and there's plenty of videos out there of people showing you how to do this, so I'm not going to be redundant in that sense. Um, just keep in mind that you can download if you go to assets and examples, that's where they have the driving videos that you see around, which I'll show you in a bit when we jump in. And then the other thing you want to look into is the examples, because if in examples is where you'll get the workflows, right? So in this case, they have image example, they have the real-time example, which is where you can just have the feed of your webcam being fed into an image. So I'm not really interested in that, so I won't be covering that. The image to image is really straightforward. It's just you give it an image, you give it a driving video, and it just animates the image based on the driving video. So I'm not terribly, I've used it and it's fine, but I'm not terribly interested in covering that at the moment. So what I am interested is in the video to video. So that this one right here is the one I'm going to be looking into. So you can just click the JSON file here, and then you can just click the copy raw file, and that you have on your copy memory right there is what you'll be pasting in ComfyUI. So when you do that, this is what you get, right? So if I go ahead and paste what I have in the clipboard, this is the default workflow that you get from the repo. So this is fine, and of course it works as expected. But I did find I do find sometimes, but it might be my Nuke brain, but I just find ComfyUI sometimes that people tend to build these workflows very tight, and I did want to add a few things for me to QC my work as I go. So I took this as the base, and then I modified it, and this is my workflow. So it's the same bones as the original, just a bit there's a bit more space to breathe, and I've added a few things here and there for me to check things as I go, for me to understand the process. And I've also added a few notes, as you can see, explaining certain things that aren't explained, because the problem with these tools is ComfyUI is evolving so quickly that people just port things over, but there's very little documentation to it. So this is the notes you'll find here is after spending many hours just testing stuff and seeing what sticks, and asking questions on Reddit, asking questions on the GitHub. So this is kind of my findings. It doesn't have all the answers by any means. I wish I could explain, I could understand more of it, but hopefully this is enough to get you started, and as more people use it, that the knowledge will go around. So okay, like obviously I'll be sharing this, of course, my workflow, because it's not something I invented. It's just grabbing the default workflow and just adding on top of it, and making it clearer and easier to read and navigate. So I'll be posting that on the description of the video, so you can just grab that and hit the ground running. So okay, so let me get into it, and I'll just give you a brief overview of what's going on here, right? So if we take it from the top here, there's really not a lot you need to do. It'll automatically download the models and everything for you, and again, just follow the instructions on the GitHub page, and you'll be fine. Uh, there is one thing to keep in mind, which is the licenses. So I would recommend, if you're going to use this in production, or if you're planning on using it in production, just make sure you go through the two GitHub pages and make sure that everything's kosher. At the moment, I haven't used it in production. I've only been testing it just to see, taking it to breaking point and see how far I can push it. But if I were to use it in production, like any other thing that I cover in terms of any GitHub projects, just make sure you check the licenses. So having said that, I'm gonna take it here from the top where it says model and cropper. So just know there, I always try to add a note at the top for you to have the GitHub page here in case you need to reference the original. So that's where I grabbed the bones for this. So we have the model and cropper. What this does is it loads the model that's going to be driving this, and the cropper is just any video you feed it. It's basically gonna it's gonna crop just the face, right? Which is what we're interested. So this is what it's doing. I personally like the results of LivePortrait better with the inside face than the media cropper. It seems to be the better one, but the results can vary from video to video, so just keep in mind that you can always just use this one instead of the one I'm using. But it seems like the consensus is inside face is the better one. So okay, so that that does its thing. I'm not going to go through every single connection, but that's what this area right here is. Then we have our source video, right? So straightforward. This is what video we want to add. Let's call it the VFX on top of, right? So if we go here, I'm just going to go ahead and select face here. So I'm just going to say this video right here, right? So you just load your video. Of course, it has to be compatible with ComfyUI, which is why I'm using an MP4 video. And if you just do that, you just have that's kind of it. You just have your source video already set up. It's like a read node, so that's what's there. And then we have beneath that we have our performance videos, right? So by default, if you go into the GitHub here, if you go to assets, right, these examples right here, the driving, actually you want to have the driving, these D0 through D9, those are the videos that you've seen 1,000 times, like this phase, right? So let me just go ahead and mute that. So that's what that is. So those you at least have those 8-9 videos to at least get you started, right? Looks like I haven't duplicated, and then you can see that kind of does it for you. So I'm gonna keep those two videos, right? And then you want to move over to the left, and I should probably add a label to this. So it's I'm gonna call this frame range, right? And this is important because I added a note here, right? So this controls how many frames you want to process, right? Because your video might be, let's say 200 frames, and your performance video might be 300 frames. So as long as the performance video is longer than the source video, you're okay. Unless you're, of course, just doing 20 frames, then that's fine because they are both longer. But if your source video is longer than your performance video, ComfyUI will give you an error. So that's why I put a note here saying that the number of performance images should be the same or larger than the source images. So if you have 100 frames for a performance video, your source video needs to be at least 100 frames, or the other way around. The source video needs to be at least 100 frames. So therefore, I added this thing here where you control how many frames you want to process for both, right? So if I just say here 100, then it's gonna cap it at 100 for each instead of having it to do it per each one of these. So let's say for now, just to keep things speedy, I'm just gonna say 24. So let's say a frame, a second. And then I've disabled the resize image. I don't see, I mean, it might be a memory thing. So I don't see the need for me to resize the source video because I've even run through 4K videos, and they seem to run just fine. Keep in mind, I am running all of this on a 4090. But it doesn't, the GPU utilization is actually quite surprisingly quite low for something that I thought would be very heavy, right? Like AI videos, all this thing that takes a lot of resources, but it doesn't seem to be the case. So I added this thing here, right? So let me just go ahead and enable this. It's just for me to see what the width and height of my videos, in case I don't want to just check in Nuke, I can just see here, and this the count says 48, of course, but if I process this now, I'm going to right click here and say Q selected output, right? It's going to be updated to 24, right? Because I set the limit here, the frame load cap, to 24. So if we check now, you see it's now changed to 24. And what we have here is basically it grabs a frame for from a frame for your video, and these are the frames that are going to be processed. So it does it per frame, right? So what this tells you, of course, is that there, like most of these tools, there is no perfect temporal consistency, but it's pretty good. It's pretty good considering what it's doing, how quickly it's doing, and how cheaply it's doing it. Like, this is really impressive. So, okay, so we have a 2560 by 1440 video, and it's okay. So what this is showing you is what the extraction of those images looks like. And now again, the resize, I'm not changing. I don't see the need to do that. And then our performance video, you can do the same if you want to. You can just set the preview, but you know what we're getting here, so no real need. This is more for me to check that there's no broken frames or any of that stuff. And I know that the performance video don't have that, but you can always just add a preview note here yourself. So you can just say here and just say preview image, right? So moving on here to the live portrait cropper. What the portrait cropper does, I'm going to go ahead and enable this thing, and I'm going to run it again, is video. So if you look at our video, most of our video is not the face, right? So I'd say maybe 20% of the video is the face. The rest is just, everything else that isn't what we're interested in. So the live portrait cropper, what does is it extracts the face area. So if I just step through the frames here, what you'll see is, it just tries to just crop into the face and ignore everything else, so that the processing is much cheaper and speedier, which makes sense. The problem, and sadly, something that I haven't been able to get an answer is, it doesn't seem to go past 512 pixels on X and Y. So if I can do this, right? I can just type 1024, but it doesn't change anything. It looks like a lot of people are trying to get an answer on this, because again, these things don't have documentation, but it doesn't seem to output higher than 512 by 512, which is unfortunate. I'd love to have an option to at least have 1024, but I mean, it is what it is, and we have access to it, and it's just, great to even just have it and play around and see what the possibilities are. So that's what the cropper does. It just crops the face and just tries to get rid of everything else. So now we have the matting, right? And the matting is the shape that is going to be used. And keep in mind that the cropper of the face cropper here extracts square images, right? So what the matting section here does is, you are creating a mat, which actually, if you don't want to be procedural, you can just provide one yourself if you wanted to build one your own. So this is just building a square mask of how this face is going to be composited onto the original video, right? So that's why it has a blur on it. Because if you just do this, right, and if I just process this, you'll see we have a hard circle here. The problem with that is that you will see the seam, right? So as always, blur is our friend. So just go ahead and enable that. And this is also in the default workflow, nothing I've added, but just know that that's what this is doing. This is just helping the composite work. And you see the mat goes straight into the live portrait composite section of the workflow. So moving on to the main controls here, I've spent a few hours now trying to figure out what everything here does, and I've added my notes here for you to read, so it tells you what each one of these settings I think does, right? And what their defaults are in case you need to reset and start over. So I've added the default for all of them, and the ones I just don't know what they're doing, I just added a question mark. So if you do have answers, if you know more about what's going on, by all means reach out, and love to fully understand what's going on here. I have some questions asked on the GitHub that haven't been answered yet. So if I do get an answer and I feel like it's important for everyone to know, I'll of course make an update to this. But I feel like this is just the starting point. And I can see there being something new in a few months. So that's what this is. I'll just go quickly through them just to give you an idea what this does. So you have the first one is lip zero. Lip zero is an interesting one because sometimes you have images. Let's see, I'm not sure about this one. Let's see her first frame. So her first frame is with the mouth closed, right? So what lip zero is trying to do is to zero out the mouth of the source video. So what do we mean by that? We want a resting pose, and the resting pose ideally is going to be closed lips so that then this thing can take over and do everything else. The problem with that is that sometimes videos that have an open mouth, like let's find a different one here. Let's see, like this one, right? She has a smile on. If we were to do lip zero, sometimes it can probably produce funky results. Not always. So again, it takes a bit of testing. This is not a just plug it in and you're done in 5 minutes kind of tool. You might need to do a few iterations. The nice thing is that it's so quick that there's no real harm in testing stuff. So I'm gonna go back to the video I was using here. So that's what lip zero does. It'll zero out the position of your mouth, and by default it's turned off because it might look a bit forceful, but if you turn it on, the nice thing is that then you can play with the threshold, which is, as I put it here, is the intensity of the change in the original pose of the mouth, right? So you can just say how much you want to force that mouth into being closed as a starting point. So I'm going to keep it off by default because I know that it's not needed for the video I have, because the one we're using right now starts with the mouth closed. Then we have the stitching, and the stitching is, let me just zoom in here for you. The stitching is what enables or disables the stitch between the unchanged areas of the plate and the new animated head. So if we don't do stitching, what you'll find, and actually let me just run this, right? So I'm just going to cue this with the stitching turned off, and you'll see how quickly it is. I'll just have this for you here, just so you can see how long it takes. And this is with me also using the GPU to record my screen. So you'll see for 24 frames, this is ridiculous, like, I don't know, 10, 20 seconds tops. So it looks like it's about done. And you see, if you see how there's like a bit of a jump in the background and the hair isn't really sitting properly, like there's a bit of ghosting, that's because I've turned off the stitching, right? So if you go back here, it's just going to do a nicer job at comping the two together, right? So if I just run that again, and I should probably turn off this. So if I run this again, you see it goes very quickly on the second generation, because what happens on the first generation is that it's extracting all of the faces for the cropper. So right here, right? So this takes always a little longer. Same for this one. It needs to extract those 24 frames that we're processing, and then it does all the live portrait stuff. So any subsequent generation gets, of course, considerably faster. You see, let's see if it says, does it say anything? 14 seconds, right? So very, very fast. So you see now with the stitching on, everything is sitting correctly. There's no jumps in the background, and the hair is looking much, much better, right? So that's what stitching is doing there. And then we have the delta multiplier, and the delta multiplier is, so as I have it here, the intensity of the new facial animation. So 1 is a perfect match, right? So as a default comes to 1. So that means that anything happening in this video is going to be set as the perfect match to this, right? So the source video is going to have the animation of the performance video as close as this thing can get it. Of course, you can bring the multiplier down to 0.5, so it's only going to push it in that direction, but it's not going to fully take over and give you a brand new animation that matches the performance video. It's just going to take it 50% there. So just to show you right now, I'm going to set this to, let's say something like 0.3, right? And if I cue this, let's see, and I'm going to turn this and this off. So see, it's very, very fast. Again, it's all happening here. Almost done. So you see, there's a bit of a hint of her closing the eye, right? If we look at the driving video for those 24 frames, actually it's showing us way more than that. She's actually closing her eyes more. There you go. So she's fully closing her eye. And if we look at our result, she's barely closing that eye, and that's because we have set the delta multiplier to 0.3, right? But if I go ahead and set it to 1 and run this again, and I should probably disable my QC section because that's also processing, and we don't really need that to be processing at the moment. Let's see. Okay, so there you go. Now she's fully closing her eye, right? So you see, it's a strength of the applied animation over our video. So I imagine most times you're going to want to have that multiplier at 1. You can, however, go past 1, right? Which I've put it here. The problem is it starts breaking the animation. So let's say we go something like 1.25, right? And we queue that again. And this time it's going to be much faster because we're just queuing the one output instead of all the other stuff I'm doing in the bottom. You see, it seems to be exaggerating more, and maybe, areas in the mouth and the teeth are breaking. Let me just go ham here and say I want it, not 22, but 2. Let's queue that again. And you can see these generations for 1 second is 6 seconds. It's just wild. And the output is the same resolution as the input video. So it's not like we're rendering a proxy. You see, now the animation is very, very exaggerated. So I can see maybe this can potentially be useful, but it's not something that I personally have a need for at the moment. But it is good to know that you can always push your animation further from the performance video. So this can be the baseline, but if you crank up the delta, then it's just gonna, like the name says, it's a multiplier, right? So it just makes it more aggressive. So I'm just gonna reset the delta multiplier to 1, just as the default is, just so we get a perfect match. I can't figure out what the mismatch method is. I've tried everything with different videos. I can't see a difference, so I'm going to skip that, which is why you have a really nice question mark here from me. Then we have the relative motion mode, and the relative motion mode is what controls the head motion from the source video and from the performance video onto the source video. So there are different options here, and I've listed what more or less what I think they do, and I have a couple that I have no idea what they're doing because I cannot see any changes when I select one or the other. But if there are a few like source video smooth at the default, and that seems to work really well. Probably why it's the default. Relative is a match, but it can feel like it's constrained the head a bit too harshly sometimes, and it sometimes has jumps. So I think that's why the smooth is the way to go. And then the other one that I do have information on is if you say just off, it's gonna disable the animation of the face, but keep the head motion, right? I don't have a need for that right now, so I'm just going to keep it at video smooth. And unfortunately, the controls for the LivePortrait video are a bit different from the ones in the image version. I only see control for global features, but I don't see granular controls as to do I want to affect the eyes, do I want to affect the mouth. I don't see a way of doing that. However, keep in mind that if you have a performance, but you just want to drive the mouth and maybe not the eyes, what I noticed is that if you go here on their website, they have an example where they've covered the mouth, right? So you see she's winking, right? And it looks like it don't want to modify the face, the mouth, so you can do that. So there, I've noticed a few times where they have black boxes over the eyes or over the mouth. So maybe that's a way of, I guess, having control. Unfortunately, you can't just say don't touch the eyes. Like it's something that it's all or nothing. So if you just prepare your performance video with blocked eyes or blocked mouth, then maybe that way you have full control of it. So moving on here, the expression friend. What is this? The expression friendly. This is only for single, for still frames, not for video. So I'm going to skip those. And then the multiplier, of course, it just works with the one above. So that kind of covers the main controls. And again, I wish I could give you more information, but there's just not a lot out there. If you do find out more, by all means, tell me. I'd love to know more. So this is what I was saying before, right? So when the cropper does its thing and it goes into the main controls and the main control spits out the new animation, right? The problem is no one can seem to figure out if there is a way of outputting higher than 512 by 512, which, okay, fine. It is what it is. I wish I had a bit more. There is just no way. I've tested everything. I can't seem to get it to render higher than that. So it kind of is what it is, right? So uh, once you have the output from the main control, which is it does these images that I was telling you about, they go into the composite, which take the matting into account, and then it composites the new head onto the original video, right? So that's what this is doing. So here we see it's keeping the resolution of the original video right there and the frame count as well, and then that kind of does that for us. So that will spit out a video, right? As we've seen here, and the nice thing about this is that you do have some options in terms of what format you want to render this out as high as ProRes, which is really nice, 16-bit PNGs. You have MP4, so you do have some options. Just because I'm trying to keep this light at the moment, I'm just using MP4 video, but I did test with ProRes and renders just fine. Of course, much higher fidelity video with less compression and higher quality, but for now MP4 is fine by me. So I have this set out just to render. And if you go here, the save output at the bottom, you can just turn on and off, because what I was saying is that you will find yourself doing many generations before you land on something you like. So sometimes it's just nice to not save a new output every time you render. So that way you can just queue as many times as you want. It's just going to show you the result here. And then once you're happy, you can just render it out again and save it instead of saving all the 50 tests you do or however many there are. So down here, this is another section I've added, and I'm just going to queue this just to have it. And what this is doing is sort of a contact sheet, right? So you can see the original video here at the bottom. We have the newly created video at the top. We have the performance video top right. And then we have a difference here at the bottom right. So this is just for me to see how much we're deviating from the original, right? So what you'll find is that the harder you push it in terms of new motion, the worse the results potentially. So you want to keep it within a threshold that makes sense. So in this case, if we go back to our performance video here, she is moving her head quite a bit. What's forgiving about it is that she is also, the camera's moving, she's moving her head quite a bit, so it is quite forgiving. But if you had something that looked, let's say, like our, let me find something here. So like this one, right? Video you've seen me use many times, where he's very, very still. If I go ahead and drive this, what you'll see is that, and I'll just cue it. Should I disable save? Yes, let me just disable that. So what you'll find is that because he's barely moving his head, the more motion you add from performance video, the worse you're off, because it has the composite needs to work much harder, and it doesn't really do a perfect job of marrying the new face onto the body, onto the original body. Hit and miss, of course, but that's what I found. I found the most success using videos that are quite still. So if I get something like this, right, where it's all about the facial animation and not so much the tilting of the head. That to me produces the best results, because again, this is not meant to be a perfectly temporally consistent tool. So you want to, if you want to play to its strengths, keep the head still as much as you can, and just make sure that it is the face that's driving all the animation. Doesn't mean that you can't do it. Of course we can, but it sometimes can produce a bit of problem. So you see here, this is pretty good, but you see what's happening in the hair, right? Like there's a lot of chattering and flickering. It's just because it doesn't really understand what's going on, and it's just a bit of ghosting and jumping around, which isn't ideal. Which is why if I were to just run this now with another one, let's just say something like that, right? I'm just going to queue it here. And again, the nice thing about this tool is just how fast this goes. Like I'm constantly surprised by the speed of which you can iterate, right? So you can just start with a second or two, and then when you're happy, you can just let the whole thing run once you find the settings that you like. So now if we wait here for a second, what you'll see is, oh, it looks like it's not doing anything. Maybe there's nothing happening on the first frame. Okay, so you can actually skip. It's a good thing that happens. So we can say skip the first 24 frames, right? So it'll start at frame 24 instead of frame 0 like before, because it looks like in the first few frames we don't have any animation. So good thing that happened. And let's see. There we go. So this one does have animation. So you see, this is much better, right? Because it doesn't have to account for all of that head motion. So this to me is the sweet spot of the tool, right? So it doesn't mean you can't use it for anything else that has head movement. Like again, it'll be shot by shot basis, but this to me is where the tool sings. So I'm gonna go back to the videos I had, and actually it doesn't matter because I've already done the generations that I want to talk about. I've already covered the QC area down here for you, and of course when you're done, you don't really need to keep this live because it's gonna make the renders take a bit longer because you don't want to create those anymore. Um, a few things I did want to tell you about. So there is that about the performance video being a still head and just focusing on the facial animation. To me, that's the key. The other thing is that because of the type of tool this is, it doesn't really like beards. So the smoother the face, the better the result. And what you'll see here is that, yeah, it looks okay, but there is just a lot of ghosting, or it's not great, right? Even the hair, you see how it's like vibrating a bit. So I can see there can be ways around it, but any results with a shaven face or women is where you want to, you'll have the best results. So actually, one more thing I forgot to mention is that you don't necessarily have to run it for humans. You have the option to select animals. So if you go here under paper, I believe, yeah, here we go. You have examples, and this is a sort of a new addition. This didn't used to be there a few weeks ago in the ComfyUI version. So just something that, if I play the series, it now works on animals as well, whereas the original version of the tool didn't have that option. So okay, I mentioned the beard, and I did render a couple of tests for you. So let me jump over to Nuke now. So now in Nuke, what I have here is here I have. Let me just play this back for you. So I have one of my renders, right? And actually, let's just look at this. There we go. So um, I have two versions, right? So with two different performances, and to me this is why it's nice to have that difference keyer at the bottom, because again it informs you before you pull the trigger in ComfyUI, and it does help you understand why things, or where to look for flaws, right? Because that's the other thing, because um, it might look fine, but if you look at the difference here, you can just, oh, okay, maybe there's the hair's drifting too much. So maybe if you warp it, then that can help, right? If you're looking at this as a final composite. So that's why that's there. So this seems to be doing a pretty good job, right? And if you look at the top, which is the newly animated one, again, what I was saying before, anything that has, just look through here, anything that has smoother face is going to be much nicer. However, what you can see, if you look closely, uh, there are small issues with the hair where it's flickering ever so slightly. And the other problem with this is that if we go to the first frame here, if I compare the result and we look at the resolution here, 2560 by 1440, and I look at the original, which is 2560 by 1440, so same resolution, and everything seems to be the same quality, more or less. Keep in mind these are MP4s, so nothing too crazy in terms of quality. But if we look at the original's sharpness of the face versus the LivePortrait output, it is considerably softer, right? So I'm just going to go, and of course, again, they are offset because the LivePortrait one has been reanimated, but you can see here, and in the hair, for example, you can clearly see how much softer the LivePortrait resulted. If we look at the eye here, it's like night and day, right? So that's the hit you take when using a tool like this. And the problem there is, again, it doesn't seem to output that face patch higher than 512 by 512. So of course that's going to be a problem. And there's, however, the nice thing is that having access to Nuke, we have access to Copycat. So I was curious, and this is not something I've tested extensively, but I tested a couple times with a couple different videos, different faces. Definitely not beards, because that doesn't work. But for women, for example, if you grab a video like this one, right? And what I've done here is I am running it through a deformat at 0.4, and the reason why I chose 0.4 is because you want to lower the resolution to this to look as soft as your result from LivePortrait, right? So you might see where I'm going with this. So I'm going to be training this through Copycat to see if I can upscale the result from LivePortrait and see if we can get sharper to that original video, as sharp as the original video. So what I have here is a reformat that's going to be scaling down our original video, and then I just have a grade here just to break the concatenation between the reformats, and then I have another reformat that's bringing it back to its original resolution, right? So if we compare the output of that lowering in quality versus the LivePortrait, that's why I landed on 0.4, right? Because I felt like, if I go something like 0.25, that's obviously too soft comparing to LivePortrait. If I go to 0.5, that's too sharp. So I landed on 0.24, on 0.4. However, this is more or less, of course, all done by eye, but definitely something worth checking out. In terms of testing, you might find a different resolution works differently depending on what you're trying to do. So okay, so I think I have a pretty good match here. And next I'm doing a crop. So I want Copycat to strictly focus on the face. I don't care about anything else, because if we look at the original versus the LivePortrait output, if we look at stuff like the shirt, the necklace, like those remain pretty much the same quality, right? And again, MP4s, but you can see this is all the same quality. Whereas if we look at the mouth, it's night and day. If we look at the eyes, one's clearly sharper than the other, which is why I want Copycat to strictly focus on the areas that I know the face will be in. And then what I did here is I chose a few frames where I have sort of a resting pose, and then I have one with an extreme position of the mouth, and then another one where I have her eyes closed and maybe showing a bit of teeth, just so that Copycat understands what we have there. And if I were to do this in production, I would, of course, select way more frames, just a few more poses, maybe eyebrows up, a more extreme mouth. But I figured for a test, just to see quickly how close I could get to that original quality. So those are the 3 frames that I am testing. And classic Copycat setup, you just copy it over to the other side, and the other side is the same video but without the down resting, right? So that's our target. So I let that run, and if I go here into the Copycat node, what you'll see is I selected as initial weights the upscale version, so the upscale option, because I tested several times on just starting with no weights whatsoever, and I let it run for 2 or 3 hours as high as 90,000 epochs, and it was just not doing a good job. And I figured, let me just try the upscale version. And that one very quickly produced very good results. So initial weights set to upscale. I set the batch size to auto and the crop size to 512 because it's pretty big image. Let's see, 1210 by 1201. And then this is, I guess, for you to decide however you want to do it. I don't like sitting at the computer and looking at the contact sheet updating, so I just keep it at every 500. One thing to keep in mind is that the upscale version of the initial weights takes a lot longer than just setting it to none, where it just flies through the initial epochs. And I was a bit underwhelmed by the speed at the beginning. But what I found out is that by something like, I think I ended up training at 2,000 or 3,000 epochs in total. So very, very quickly, I stopped it just to see where it was, and you'll see the results are very good. So if we So what that means is that even though it goes much, much slower, it produces results very quickly. So that's a win for us. So if I look here at our result, right, and now we look at our inference result output, right? So what you'll see is that, again, this is having only trained it for what I believe was 2 or 3,000 epochs, so barely anything, right? And you can see very quickly how the hair, the edge of the face, even the mouth is starting to grab a lot of that original detail. And if I go here into, let me just set it to frame 1. If we compare this to, so this is the original plate, if I compare it to LivePortrait, right? And now if I compare it to that inference output, you can see it's definitely going in the right direction. You can see everything is much, much sharper. And just so you can see them side by side here, I'm going to set, so you can see the eye here is incredibly sharper compared to the original. The eyebrows, the hair is actually truly impressive. Compared, was maybe a 10-minute training for Copycat, so I can see I can see if you leave it training for maybe an hour, maybe 2, having more frames, this will do a pretty good job of bringing us closer to that original quality. So if we go here to the inference, right, and I just play that back, just keep in mind that it is also upscaling things that I don't want it to upscale. So if we look at the inference output for the chain here compared to the original, you see it is sharpening the chain, the finger, the shirt. So you might want to have the render out the inference for your new upscale, but then key mix the original, right? And the nice thing is that it's going to be fairly easy for you to do because you know that it's as simple as a mat like this. And again, that's where the QC comes in handy. So if I just go here into my LivePortrait and I'm going to find that version 1, where do I have it? So let's just say this is fine, right? So now that's where this comes in handy. So rendering this out is nice because you can just expose up that result, and this is going to be dictating how you're going to key mix the result of the inference over the original, because like I said, you probably don't want to keep the inference run on everything else that isn't the face. So something that'll help you drive that key mix between the two. Another thing that I wanted to point you in the direction of is that, again, when you have videos like this one where she's moving her head around, that seems to be problematic sometimes. So if we, actually this frame's perfect, right? So you can see here how the original hair, oops, sorry about that, here we go. So you can see here how the original hair has no issues here on the right, but because she's doing a more extreme motion than we can patch correctly, you see how we start getting a bit of a ghost of the hair. So of course those things can be cleaned up and all that stuff, but that's why I think if I were to use this in production, I'd stray away from having the head moving around. So just something for you to keep an eye on. And again, that's where the difference render is also helpful, because where you see too much white, you probably want to check out, see that there's no funny business going on. So it helps you look at the potential problem areas. So okay, hopefully that does it. And if I can think of anything else, I'll make sure to make a follow-up video. If I'm sure this is going to be evolving, but I did want to have something for you in terms of this technology, because I know a lot of people have been wanting to try it, and I do think it's worth testing. But for now, LivePortrait plus Copycat looks like the winning combination. So it's gonna do it for me today. All right, cheers.